This is an OCR A-Level Biology revision video on Unit 6.6 Populations and Sustainability. This is actually not where we're starting. I just wanted to start here for the thumbnail because I like this picture. Anyway, we're starting at the start with this graph here. So you've probably seen it before. It comes up in a few topics. It's the stages of growth. On this graph, it's also got this thing called death phase, but that's more to do with bacteria, and here we're looking at organisms in general, so I'm just going to cross this bit off. We can ignore it in this topic, okay? Alright, so first of all we have the lag phase. So the lag phase is when there are only a few individuals and they're acclimatizing to the habitat, okay? So their rate of reproduction is low and the growth of population size is slow. So as we see, the population just stays at a constant rate during the lag phase. Okay. Then we have the log phase. So the log phase is when there are plentiful resources, good conditions, therefore we get rapid reproduction which exceeds mortality. So reproduction is higher than death rate. I'll write that in black. Reproduction is higher than, do this sign, death. Okay, so during our log phase we are reproducing more than individuals are dying, hence we get a rapid growth. Then we've got our stationary phase here in green, and that is when the population size levels out at the carrying capacity. So carrying capacity is sort of the limit of the ecosystem. So it's the uppermost population that habitat can support. So if you go over the carrying capacity, you start to get limiting factors, but carrying capacity is like the maximum population that the ecosystem / environment / habitat can support. Okay, so I've mentioned limiting factors here. So at the stationary phase we have low reproduction, the population levels out of the carrying capacity, okay? So this reproduction is low due to our limiting factors. So they limit growth rate, population growth rate. So as you see at the stationary phase, log phase ends and then our population is maintained at this level. And there's two types of limiting factors. So you can have density dependent and density independent. So density independent, clues in the name, it is independent of the population density. So these are the sort of factors that are going to impact the population no matter how big the population is, such as temperature. So even if you've got one individual or if you've got 1,000, the temperature will affect each individual equally, okay? Density dependent limiting factors are when the greater the population size, the greater the impact of the limiting factor, okay? Generally speaking. So if you've got less food or less water, generally you have a greater impact on the population size as individuals are competing for those resources. Same with light for plants. If you've got limited light, the plants that can utilize that light energy better will be the ones that survive. And another example here is resting sites. So density dependent causes intra and interspecific competition between species, which I'll speak to you about in detail soon. Okay, so that was the graph, and now we've got this second graph here. This is showing K and R strategies. So first I'll speak to you about K strategies, which pretty much follow this trend here. So K strategists, they have their lag phase, log phase of growth, and then they reach the carrying capacity of the environment. So K strategists, they are usually animals with a large body mass. They've usually got a longer lifespan and low reproductive rate. They develop slowly, they have a late reproductive age, so they reproduce slowly. Therefore, once they reach the carrying capacity of the environment, which is the upper limit of limiting factors, the maximum of the population that is sustainable, once they reach this maximum sustainable population, the population stops growing and they'll just remain constant, or it'll fluctuate slightly. Okay. Then we've got R strategists, in which this blue graph here, and I've added the extra bit of the line which wasn't shown in the diagram I took from the internet. The population size increases so rapidly that it can quickly exceed the carrying capacity at the habitat before the limiting factors start to have an effect. So once this carrying capacity is exceeded, there are no longer enough resources for survival. So they exceed this carrying capacity, and that is called the boom in population. Then it gets too much, the resources are too little, and suddenly you get this bust in population. Everything dies because they run out of resources. They've overused the environment. So you get excessive buildup of waste products. Small organisms are strategists. They have a high reproductive rate. They've got quick development, young reproductive age, short lifespan, small body mass. Bacteria could be an example of our strategists, but we are thinking of it more as in animals in this topic. So stuff like spiders. So spiders, they reproduce in huge numbers. One spider will produce hundreds or thousands of other baby spiders, and then we get this log phase, so the population rapidly increases. Then there's too many of them. That's the amount of spiders that the environment can handle for a sustainable population. We've exceeded that, so all these spiders here, they will die. The weaker ones die, and the strongest ones survive. And we go well below, and then it sort of starts again, and we increase with large fluctuations of that R strategist graph. Now we're going to look at the interactions between populations. So this is a predator and prey graph. So if we've got loads of gazelles, we can support a high population of lions because they have a lot of food. A lot of gazelles, so a lot of lions can survive. Eventually, the lions, so we say gazelle population grows, they've got a high number here, so the lion population is growing as they've got more food to eat. Then, as they're eating more gazelles, the population of gazelles will therefore decrease until a point where the lion population becomes so high, they've now not got enough food, and the lion population decreases, and the decrease in the lion population allows the gazelle population to increase. I think that is fairly easy to get a grasp of. So when the predator population gets bigger, more prey are eaten, decreasing the prey population. Less prey equals less food resources for predators, hence their population size reduces. This allows for prey population to increase again, restarting the cycle. So this is a cycle. Okay, we just see it going up and down, up and down. In the real world, this wouldn't be exactly how it goes. This would be the general trend. However, we'd see larger increases some years and small increases other years. Okay, your prey populations should always be larger than your predator population. the graph varies depending on other limiting factors, okay? Then we've got my favourite part of this, just because of this picture that I found on the internet of a grey squirrel killing a red squirrel with a sword, okay, and that's for interspecific competition. So first of all, let's look at intra-specific competition. So this is between the same species. So individuals of one species, they compete with each other. So they're competing for food to survive and reproduce. They occupy the same niche, okay? So members of the same species occupy the same niche. They want the same resources. They produce the same waste, okay? Therefore, they have to compete with each other like these two. I think they're antelope. They're competing with each other. Sorry, I forgot the animal completely wrong. I don't really have a clue. Could have been the gazelles I'm talking about as well. Looks like little Bambis. They compete with each other for resources. So these two males, I'm guessing they're males because they're pretty aggressive, are competing with each other probably for a mate, or it might be over some food or something like that, okay? So we see natural selection arises from intraspecific competition. So this competition for resources, the strongest individuals survive. Selection pressures are put when a selection pressure is put on the population, the strongest survive, the weakest die. The allele frequency changes, so you get generally the strongest alleles are passed down to the next generation, and you have a higher proportion of the next generation with these stronger characteristics, okay, for survival. So interspecific, you're competing with your own species to survive, okay? I've got stationary phase of growth here. So usually for interspecific competition, we're just seeing a maintained level of growth, okay? The population state, the weakest members die, the strongest reproduce and produce more stronger individuals, okay? Got this thing at the bottom here, so an increase in population causes an increase in competition, and this increase in competition will then eventually decrease the population again. So interspecific competition is not that difficult to get a grip of. Neither is interspecific competition. So that is between different species. They compete for resources. Again, stronger species survive. And here we see niches overlap, but they're not very rarely the same. And this is because of the competitive exclusion principle. So two species in a habitat cannot occupy the same niche. One will always outcompete the other. And the example I've got here is grey and red squirrels. So grey squirrels were introduced, I think they were American grey squirrels. They were introduced into England, and they're bigger, they're larger, they're more aggressive than these red squirrels, and they outcompete the red squirrels for resources, and they don't actually hold swords and stab each other. But this is just hypothetically showing you that grey squirrels are outcompeting these red squirrels. Okay. However, habitats can impact different success rates. So in different habitats, one species that was outcompeted may have a better advantage. So, for example, in Scotland, I believe we have more red squirrels than grey squirrels because they're better adapted to live there. I don't know how true that is anymore. You might want to look at it if it interests you. Anyway, let's get away from that picture now, as much as I love it. Next, we've got conservation and preservation. And thanks to Mrs. Miller's blogs, I've took one of her PowerPoint slides and put in here because I realised my writing's not that easy to read. First of all, you've got conservation, which is the management of ecosystems so that the natural resources in them can be used without them running out. So we're looking at sustainable use, okay? such as timber management. It can also be reclamation, restoring ecosystems that have been damaged or destroyed. It is dynamic and needs to adapt to constant change. So here we're trying to maintain biodiversity in conservation, okay? You actively intervene with succession. You want to maintain species diversity and genetic diversity and maintain the ecosystem as well, okay? We've got preservation as well, which is not the same. Similar though, it's keeping habitats as they are new, natural. So you want to maintain habitats and ecosystems in their present condition, minimise human impact. So the definition we've got here was protecting ecosystems so they're kept exactly as they are, nothing removed, they're only used for activities that don't damage them. So what we want to do in preservation is just minimise human impacts. For conservation, it's usually a matter of humans have already had an impact on it, and let's try and be a bit more sensible in how we're using this environment. But preservation is like, we've not touched this, let's keep it that way, just protect this environment, put bans to prevent people using it. And at the bottom here I've got some conservation methods, but just before that there's three threats to biodiversity. First of all is overexploitation. So we're removing things faster than they can replenish. So for example, fish, overfishing. We fish faster than they can replenish, hence reduced salmon in the world. But I think we're getting better at fishing now and it's becoming less of a problem. But definitely in the past, overfishing was a bad issue. Secondly, we've got habitat destruction and fragmentation. You should know all about that. There's lots more detail into these threats to biodiversity in other topics, especially in Unit 4. And non-native species introduction, such as our grey squirrel here, which was non-native to England. It was introduced and it has pretty much wiped out our red squirrel populations. Right, finally on this page is conservation methods. And I made this myself. Sorry if someone else already thought of it, but I doubt it. I call it 2 C's, 3 D's, 4 E's. So C, D, E, you should know your alphabet. They are in order. 2 C's, 3 D's, 4 E's. That is 9 points. That if you got an 8-mark question on this, if you remember these 9 points, chances are 8 of those 9 will get you a mark. Hopefully 9 of them would. But knowing A-levels, probably wouldn't, because exam boards do like to mug you off every now and again. Right, C's. Right, we've got carrying capacity. So as a conservation method, we want to increase our carrying capacity so we can provide resources. So to increase our carrying capacity, we want to reduce the number of limiting factors. Let's go back to here. So if we want to increase this carrying capacity, put it higher so we can have a higher populations, we need to decrease the limiting factors. And we can do that by providing resources like food. So if we provide food in the habitat, more individuals can live and reproduce there. Okay. Then we've got controlling of poaching and predation. So preventing poachers from killing stuff like elephants and rhinos for ivory, okay? And just decreasing the amount of predators. So our primary consumers, secondary consumers, their populations can grow more, okay? Then we've got our 3 Ds, dispersal of individuals, so we want to keep that as natural as possible. We don't want to separate individuals from each other too much. So what we want to do is just sort of use preservation tactics, just take a step back and allow natural dispersal of individuals. So diseases, we want to vaccinate disease. So if we can vaccinate populations against diseases, obviously that's going to be a good thing. It's going to decrease parasites and population decreasing, like prevent the death phase. Okay, then we've got deflected succession, such as coppicing and mowing. I'm going to speak to you about coppicing. I can't remember which one's the right one. I think it's coppicing. On the next slide, so deflected succession, we know is preventing the climax community from being reached. So sometimes we don't want woodlands to be reached, because then it stops small bushes and shrubs from existing. So if we deflect succession, we can maintain the current ecosystem. Okay, then we've got our 4 E's: educate, establish, ex situ and endangered. So we can educate communities on the importance of conservation. So I'm going to speak to you soon about the Masai Mara, and there's a huge focus there on education of tribes and telling them the importance of conservation, because naturally humans, they see a resource, they see a woodland, they're like, great, let's cut it all down, let's get some firewood. And then once they've cut it all down, they've no longer got that resource. And there are more sustainable methods of harvesting the earth's resources. So we're about to speak about them. So like coppicing, you cut things down, allowing them to grow back. So then once you've got to the end, you can go back to where you started and cut those ones down again. So teaching people the importance of conservation and how in the long term you'll get more benefits from it. Okay, then we've got established protected areas. So we can create wildlife reserves, nature parks. If you see in this slide here, we've got this rhino, which was being poached, is now, I think it might be the last white rhino in this region. It's being protected by armed poachers, by armed, don't know what to call them, just armed geezers protecting this rhino from poachers. Okay, so we've got protected areas where human impact's minimised, which I've got up here. Ex situ conservation, so we've got zoos and botanical gardens. So sometimes the numbers of species get so low, we've just got to try and keep some species captive and try and introduce breeding programs and try and reintroduce them to environment when they will be stronger. Okay, and then we have this endangered species legal protection, such as CITES and Rio Convention, which I might do a video on in the future on Unit 4. Okay, so we can legally protect endangered species. So there's laws, poaching laws. So poaching in most countries, well, nearly every country, is a crime. Hence why these people here can shoot poachers if they try and attack this rhino. Okay, so this rhino has its own armed guards, which is pretty incredible.